I used to believe family was unbreakable, that the hands you raised would never turn against you. But the day I walked into that courtroom, I realized blood doesn't always mean loyalty. My name is Helen Marshall. I'm 71 years old, a retired nurse, and the mother of 3 children who once swore we'd never let the world come between us. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and cold. Case number 2417, the estate of Helen Marshall. My name echoed through the courtroom like it belonged to someone else. I sat at the back in my wheelchair, hidden under a grey shawl that smelled faintly of lavender. My children didn't even glance in my direction. They stood in front of the judge, faces red, voices trembling with fury, arguing over a will they thought I'd left behind. Michael, my eldest, wore the same navy suit he had at his father's funeral, but the fabric strained now against his stomach. He jabbed his finger toward Laura, shouting, "You manipulated her, Laura! You made her change it!" Laura's chin lifted, her diamond earrings trembling with every word. "Don't you dare talk to me about manipulation. You're the one who took her signatures when she was in the hospital." And David, my youngest, the quiet one, he stood a few steps behind them, pale, his hands buried in his pockets. He said nothing, but his silence cut deeper than their shouting. I remember the smell of varnish on the wooden benches, the judge's sigh as he tried to restore order, the soft click of my rosary beads rolling in my palm as I whispered under my breath, "Lord, give me strength." Just 2 months earlier, all 3 of them had been sitting in my garden, eating peach cobbler and laughing. I can still see Laura plucking a leaf off Michael's shoulder, David pretending to complain about his sister's cooking. The air had smelled of cut grass and rain. Now their laughter was gone. Replaced by accusations and lawyers' folders thicker than my wedding album. I used to tell my patients that pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. That day I learned heartbreak does the same. The judge cleared his throat. "This court recognizes a dispute over the validity of the late Mrs. Marshall's will." Late. They thought I was gone. I looked down at my hands, veined, trembling, yet somehow stronger than ever. They thought I was dead, and still, they couldn't even mourn in peace. All they could see was the fortune their father and I built over 40 years of sacrifice. I leaned back in my chair and watched them, wondering when exactly they became strangers. Was it the day their father died, or the moment I decided to rewrite my will without telling them? The truth is, I'd seen this coming. A mother always does. It started quietly, the way storms often do. Michael began calling only when he needed advice about his mortgage. Laura visited with expensive cakes and questions about paperwork. David, sweet David, kept his distance, avoiding the tension he could feel, but never understand. I told myself it was just life. People get busy. Love doesn't vanish, it just sleeps. But sitting there in that courtroom, I realized love hadn't been sleeping. It had been buried. The judge raised his eyes from the documents. "Before we proceed, I need to confirm certain details of ownership." The air thickened. My breath caught. My children straightened like soldiers preparing for battle. I closed my eyes and felt a tear roll down my cheek, not from sadness, but from the bitter recognition that this was the price of everything I'd worked for. My husband, Thomas, and I used to dream of leaving something meaningful behind. Not money, but stability, dignity, a home filled with laughter. Now those dreams were being torn apart in front of a dozen strangers. I opened my eyes again. Laura's lawyer handed a stack of papers to the judge, his tone rehearsed and mechanical. "Your Honour, this version of the will was signed 6 months ago, transferring all real estate to my client." Michael's lawyer immediately objected. "Objection, Your Honour! The signature on that document has already been questioned by our handwriting expert." Their voices blended into one, a cacophony of greed, fear, and desperation. But I heard something deeper beneath it, the faint echo of lullabies, scraped knees, bedtime stories, the ghosts of my children's innocence. For 71 years, I had believed that love, once given, could never rot. But even love, it seems, can spoil when left in the hands of entitlement. The judge's gavel struck again, silencing the room. "Enough! We will hear the final statement at once." A hush fell. My heart beat slow and steady, the same rhythm I'd counted during night shifts at the hospital waiting for patients to wake after surgery. The difference now was that this operation wasn't about saving life. It was about revealing truth. As the clerk opened the final envelope, I gripped my rosary tighter. I knew what was inside, because I had placed it there myself. Still, watching their faces, my children's faces, I felt something twist inside me. Pity? Regret? Maybe both. When the judge began to read, I noticed how the light from the high windows fell directly on his hands, illuminating the paper. It reminded me of Sundays in church, when sunlight caught the edge of the altar, how beauty can still exist even in judgment. According to the sealed statement from Mrs. Marshall's attorney, my children leaned forward. The entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. The ownership of the estate will be clarified by Clause 17, the words that would rewrite their lives and mine. But not yet, not now, because before the truth can be revealed, the world must understand how it all began. And so I will tell you, from the beginning, from the house my husband built with his bare hands, to the betrayal that tore us apart. My name is Helen Marshall, and this is the story of how my children fought over my will until the day they learned what real inheritance means. When I close my eyes and think of peace, I don't see wealth. I see the little wooden house where everything began, the one Thomas and I built with our own hands. We were young, foolish, and in love, the kind of love that didn't know fear yet. Thomas was a carpenter, quiet and strong, with eyes that smiled before his lips ever did. I was a nurse at the town clinic, working night shifts and double shifts, patching up broken bones and broken spirits. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Every nail he hammered into those walls carried a promise. This will stand longer than we will. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, one for us and one for the someday children. The floors creaked in winter, and the roof leaked when it rained. But when I made tea on those mornings, steam rising like hope, I used to whisper to myself, "This is home." Thomas would come home with sawdust on his collar and a smile that made the whole room warm. We'd sit on the porch, him sharpening his tools, me darning socks, listening to the crickets. We didn't need music. Life itself was enough of a melody. When Michael was born, Thomas built his crib by hand, carved a small M on the corner. When Laura came, he built another, with tiny flower engravings. When David arrived, unexpected but dearly loved, he joked that our little house would need to stretch its walls. We made it stretch. Love always finds a way to fit where space runs out. But peace never stays untested. Thomas fell ill when the children were still small, a heart attack that came without warning. I remember the smell of antiseptic, the blinding white hospital lights, and the way his hand felt colder than it ever should have. He whispered, "You'll be fine. You've always been stronger than me." He was wrong. I wasn't strong. I just had no choice but to become it. The day I buried him, I promised him 2 things: that I would keep the house standing, and that I would raise our children to love one another as fiercely as he loved them. I worked every shift I could. Nights blurred into mornings. Sometimes I'd come home and find the children already asleep at the kitchen table, waiting for me. I'd cover them with my shawl and whisper, "We're okay. We're still together." There was a time when the laughter in that house could cure any sorrow. Michael's jokes, Laura's singing, David's quiet sketches on the walls. I remember the scent of lemon polish on Sundays, the way sunlight filtered through lace curtains, dust dancing like tiny miracles. We didn't have riches, but we had pride, the kind of pride that grows from knowing your blessings are hand-earned. Years passed, and I began investing carefully. Thomas had taught me never to fear small beginnings. I bought one property, then another, rented them out to families who needed shelter. Every brick felt like his legacy continuing through my hands. I never told the children exactly how much I had built over the years, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want them to measure love in currency. Michael grew into a responsible, driven man. He became an accountant, precise, always seeking order in chaos. Laura pursued design. Her eye for beauty reminded me of her father's hands. And David, my gentle artist, he painted everything he couldn't say. For a long time, I believed I had done something right. They visited often, brought me gifts, and we'd share long Sunday lunches, until small things began to change. Michael started talking more about asset values than family stories. Laura began asking if I had finalized the paperwork. David looked uneasy when conversations turned to money. At first, I brushed it aside, told myself this is what aging feels like, watching your children slowly drift from warmth into worry. Boo. Something in my chest began to ache each time they looked at me like I was a number, not a mother. One spring morning, I decided to clean the house alone, something I hadn't done in years. The scent of furniture polish filled the rooms, the same lemon scent from decades ago. On my husband's dresser lay his old pocket watch, still ticking faintly. I pressed it against my heart and thought, you'd know what to do if you were here. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and wrote a new draft of my will. I divided everything equally, every property, every savings account. I wanted to make sure none of them would feel less loved. I even placed a small envelope beside each section, a personal letter to each child, to Michael, for the one who always carried responsibility heavier than his years, to Laura, for the one who sees beauty even where others see none, to David, for the one who reminds me that silence can be kind. I sealed the papers and felt a strange peace settle over me. I believed fairness could save us, but I was wrong. Fairness means little when hearts are no longer humble. That night, I dreamed of Thomas again. He stood by the garden gate, the one he'd built himself, holding a key in his palm. He didn't speak. He just smiled and set the key down on the table beside my tea. When I woke up, the cup was still warm. I took it as a sign. The next morning, I locked the final draft of my will inside the wooden chest by the window, the same one that once held our wedding photos. I remember whispering, "This is our promise, Thomas. Our children will always have each other." The irony of that sentence would haunt me later. I never imagined that the same chest would be broken open, that the same signatures I placed in trust would be copied, that the children I raised to love one another would one day stand across from each other in court. But those days were still ahead, hidden like cracks under the paint of a perfect wall. I still believed love was enough. I still believed they remembered where they came from. I still believed the house we built on sacrifice could never be divided. I was wrong about many things, but not about the house. That little wooden home still stands, because some things, no matter how bruised, are too sacred to break. It started with a letter. A single white envelope slid beneath my door on a Thursday morning. No stamp, no name, just my address, typed neatly in black. I remember the sunlight falling across the floorboards as I bent to pick it up. The paper was thick, expensive, out of place in my humble home. When I tore it open, the scent of office ink filled the air. And then dread. It was a note from my lawyer. "Dear Mrs. Marshall, kindly confirm the signature on the revised deed you sent last week. As discussed, all property transfers will proceed after your acknowledgement." I froze. I hadn't sent any such document. My first thought was a mistake. My second was fear. My third, and most painful, was suspicion. I folded the letter carefully, placed it beside my tea, and stared at the steam curling upward. Someone had forged my hand. I told myself to stay calm. I'd worked decades in hospitals where panic killed faster than wounds, but there are no medical instruments to steady a mother's heart when she starts to doubt her own children. That evening, Laura arrived with flowers, bright lilies and her usual perfume, sweet and deliberate. She kissed my cheek and smiled too widely. "Mum, you shouldn't check your mail yourself. I told the postman to leave everything with me." My hands trembled. "You told him?" "Of course," she said lightly. "You're getting older. Let me help." Her tone was gentle, but behind it I sensed control, the kind that wraps itself in care until you stop noticing the cage. We sat together in the kitchen, sipping tea. She kept steering the conversation toward papers, signatures, hospital forms. I nodded absently, watching how her eyes darted to the drawer where I kept my files. I had raised her better than this, or so I thought. 2 days later, Michael called. His voice was calm but distant, the way people sound when they're rehearsing Hono. After she left, I locked the door and went straight to my bedroom. From under the bed, I pulled out the small tin box where I kept every important paper, birth certificates, deeds, bank records, and that final will I'd written by candlelight. I counted each page. One was missing. My breath caught in my throat. I searched again. Nothing. Then I saw it. A faint shoe mark near the box, heel-shaped, outlined in dust. Laura's shoes always had that tiny gold buckle. I sat on the floor, clutching the papers, and whispered, "Not you, Laura. Please, not you." But the silence answered for her. Days turned into weeks. I said nothing, waiting, watching. Sometimes betrayal reveals itself best when left alone, like fruit that spoils faster in sunlight. Michael began calling more often now, curious about the house, the rentals, the insurance. "You should consider consolidating everything, Mom. Makes the inheritance easier to divide later." Inheritance. The word burned. "I didn't know my love needed division," I replied quietly. He laughed awkwardly, said he was joking, but the air between us felt different, thinner, colder. And David, dear David, kept his distance, as though he could feel the tension but didn't know how to stop it. He sent letters instead of visits, sketches of hands reaching for each other but never touching. Perhaps he already understood what words could no longer mend. One afternoon, while watering the garden, I noticed Laura's car parked down the street. She wasn't coming inside, she was watching. Her window rolled down just enough for her cigarette smoke to curl into the breeze. When she noticed me looking, she waved, too cheerfully, then drove away. That night, my neighbour Martha stopped by. "Helen, I saw your daughter leaving the lawyer's office yesterday. Is everything all right?" I smiled thinly. "She's just helping me with some things." But inside, my chest ached with a truth I couldn't yet admit. I was losing my family one signature at a time. I knew I had to act quietly, so I called Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, and told him to prepare a sealed document, one only to be opened upon my confirmed death. He agreed hesitantly. "You don't trust them?" he asked gently. "I trust who they used to be," I said. "But love without boundaries becomes hunger." When I hung up, I sat by the window as the evening sun poured gold across the floor. For a brief moment, everything looked peaceful again. The roses in bloom, the laughter of children on the street, the hum of life continuing as if nothing were wrong. But I knew better. Peace built on silence is just a pause before the storm. A week later, I overheard Laura on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Yes, she'll sign soon. Don't worry. Once it's filed, it's over." I stepped forward. "Laura, who were you talking to?" She froze, then smiled that too smooth smile. "Oh, Mom, you scared me. Just a friend. We're planning the fundraiser for the church." Her lie hung in the air like perfume. Pleasant, but poisonous. I said nothing, just looked at her. Sometimes silence is the loudest punishment. That night, I opened my Bible, the one Thomas had given me on our first Christmas. A dried rose slipped out from the day of his funeral. Its petals were brittle, but still red in the center. I placed it on my palm and whispered, "Help me protect what we built." The house creaked softly in the dark, as if answering back. Outside, the wind carried the faint rustle of papers, or maybe memory itself, and I understood. The letter that came that morning wasn't just a warning. It was the beginning of an unraveling that would end with all three of my children standing in that courtroom fighting over a will that wasn't what they thought. And it was... The phone rang that evening. Michael again. "I heard Laura came by with a lawyer," he said, his tone tight. "She told me you're mentally unfit to manage your assets." I froze. She said, "What?" "She's filing for guardianship, Mom. If she succeeds, you'll lose control of everything." The cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The tea spread like a dark stain across the tiles. "Michael, listen to me," I whispered. "You can't let her do this." "I won't," he said. "But you have to tell me exactly what's going on." For the first time in months, I heard a hint of the old Michael, the protective son, the one who used to fix my leaky faucet and laugh about his clumsy mother. I told him everything, about the forged letter, the missing document, the strange visits. He was silent for a long time. "All right," he said finally. "I'll take care of it. I'll talk to my lawyer tomorrow." But I knew what "take care of it" meant in his language. It meant escalation. It meant more fire, where I needed calm. By the weekend, all three of them were at war. Michael filed an injunction against Laura, accusing her of fraud. Laura retaliated, claiming he was manipulating me. David tried to mediate, but his voice was drowned under the noise. I stopped answering calls. My heart couldn't handle the shouting anymore. The media of small-town gossip began to spread. Whispers at the market, neighbours pretending not to stare. The Marshalls are fighting over money, they said. Can you imagine? After all that woman did for them. I could imagine, because I was living it. One night, David knocked on my door. His eyes were red, his voice trembling. "Mom, please," he said. "Can't you just tell them what's in the will? Maybe then they'll stop." "No, darling," I said gently. "They'll only stop when they lose what they're fighting for." He didn't understand then, but he would. I spent the following days making arrangements. I called my lawyer and told him to finalize the sealed document, with an additional clause, one even my children didn't know about. He hesitated. "Mrs. Marshall, this will cause an uproar." "Let it," I said firmly. Sometimes justice needs a little noise before it finds its silence. After he left, I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The air smelled of rain, and the garden shimmered with dew. Thomas's old pocket watch ticked steadily beside me, the same rhythm that had comforted me for decades. I opened it and whispered to the empty chair beside me. "You'd be ashamed, Thomas, but you'd also be proud. I'm protecting what we built." A breeze swept across the yard, carrying the faint scent of roses. I took it as his answer. The next morning, a storm hit, literal and emotional. Michael showed up at my door, soaked to the bone, clutching papers. Laura followed minutes later, shouting his name. The house that once held lullabies now echoed with accusations. "Michael, you forged documents!" Laura, "You lied to Mum about everything!" Me, "Enough!" My voice cracked the air like lightning. They froze, both stunned, like children caught breaking glass. I looked at them and felt something inside me break, quietly, finally. "Do you know what hurts most?" I said. "Not that you're fighting, but that you've both become so small in the shadow of what we built." Laura's lip trembled. "Mum, I was only trying to save me, or own me." She had no answer. Michael lowered his gaze. "I just didn't want her to take everything. And in trying to stop her," I said, "you both took something far worse. My peace." David stood near the stairs, eyes wet, whispering, "Stop, please, stop." But they didn't. By the time the storm ended, words had been said that could never be taken back. Love had turned into armor, family into enemies. That night, as the thunder faded, I packed a small suitcase and wrote 3 letters, one for each of them. I left them in the same chest where Thomas's photograph still sat. Then I called the lawyer one final time. "It's time," I said. "File the clause." He didn't ask which one. He already knew. The next morning, the air was strangely clear, the kind of quiet that comes after everything breaks. I looked out at the garden, the soil still wet from rain. My roses had survived the storm. Their petals glistened with water, fragile yet defiant. I smiled through my tears. Even storms can't kill what's rooted in love. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sky the colour of steel. I remember how cold the air felt on my skin, sharp enough to cut through the layers of my shawl. Outside the courthouse, the flags barely moved, as though even the wind was holding its breath. Michael's car was parked in front, Laura's a few feet behind. They didn't speak as they walked toward the doors, but their silence was louder than shouting. David followed last, his head bowed, clutching a folded handkerchief in both hands. From my wheelchair at the back entrance, I watched them pass, unnoticed. It was almost poetic. The 3 souls I brought into this world, now walking into judgment for what they had done to one another. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, the faint echo of shoes against marble. Every sound seemed to remind me that this wasn't a home anymore. It was an arena. The clerk called the case number. Estate of Helen Marshall. Contested will. My name again, spoken like a transaction. I took a slow breath and whispered to myself, "I'm here, Thomas. I'm watching." The judge, a tall man with greying hair and an expression both kind and tired, adjusted his glasses and looked at my children. "I understand," he began, "that this matter involves disputes over multiple property transfers, 2 versions of a will, and allegations of forgery. Is that correct?" Laura's lawyer stood first, his tone sharp and deliberate. "Yes, Your Honour. My client, Ms. Laura Marshall, wishes to assert that the most recent will represents the true intent of her late mother, who, Michael's lawyer interrupted. Objection, Your Honor. That so-called will was forged under manipulation while Mrs. Marshall was medically unfit. The judge's hand lifted. Enough. Their voices clashed, and I could feel the air thickening with every accusation, every sentence felt like another crack in the wall of everything I'd built. And then the judge said the words that silenced the room. Before we proceed, I have here a sealed document submitted by Mrs. Marshall's attorney prior to her passing. A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Laura's face drained of colour. Michael leaned forward. David's hands shook visibly. The judge continued. This document was accompanied by a private letter from Mrs. Marshall to be read in open court upon the conclusion of inheritance proceedings. I could see Laura's lips move silently. What letter? The clerk brought the sealed envelope to the judge. He held it up, the golden wax seal catching the light. I recognized it instantly. I had pressed that seal myself, with the same brass stamp Thomas used to sign our first mortgage papers. The judge broke the seal carefully. Paper rustled. The room was so still I could hear my own heartbeat. Clause 17, he read aloud. In the event that disputes or legal actions arise among my heirs regarding the division of my estate, all personal and real properties shall be transferred in entirety to the Marshall Community Trust, established in 2016 for the benefit of children's hospitals and community education programs. A silence deeper than death fell over the courtroom. Laura blinked, her lips parting in disbelief. What? What trust? Michael's voice cracked. She gave it away? David just closed his eyes and whispered, Mum. The judge continued. Further, Mrs. Marshall's letter specifies that all 3 children shall retain no financial inheritance, but will each receive a symbolic item in accordance with her written wishes. He looked up at them, then nodded to the clerk, who brought forward a small wooden box. I recognized that box too. Thomas had carved it himself. The clerk opened it and removed 3 envelopes, each labelled in my handwriting, each carrying a piece of my soul. The judge cleared his throat and began reading the attached letter. My letter. I could almost hear my own voice in his steady tone. To my children. If you are hearing this, it means the love I taught you has been buried beneath something else. Something I can no longer heal. I built my life with your father out of faith and sacrifice. Everything we earned together. But what matters most was never the money. It was the lesson. A legacy isn't what you keep, it's what you give. You 3 have spent months fighting over something that was never truly yours. The house, the land, the accounts, they belong to your father's dream and my devotion. So I have chosen to give them where they will live on, in the laughter of sick children who will sleep under new roofs, and in the books of students who can now afford an education. You may hate me for this now, but one day you'll understand. The fortune wasn't stolen from you. It was rescued from your greed. A gasp escaped Laura's lips. Michael stared at the floor, shoulders hunched. David wiped his eyes. The judge continued reading. Michael, you will receive your father's pocket watch to remind you that time spent chasing wealth is time stolen from love. Laura, you will receive the key to our family home, not to open its doors, but to remember how it once felt to belong there without owning it. David, you will receive my wedding ring, because you, my gentle boy, never tried to possess anything that wasn't already yours. Love. Tears blurred my vision. Even though I had written those words, hearing them aloud made me feel both hollow and free. The judge folded the letter and looked up at them. This court recognizes the validity of the sealed clause. The estate of Helen Marshall shall be legally transferred to the Marshall Community Trust, effective immediately. Laura's lawyer tried to protest, his words stumbling over themselves. Your Honor, surely this must be final, the judge said, his tone absolute. This court upholds the wishes of the deceased. Laura's face crumpled. She turned to Michael, tears streaking her makeup. You did this! You turned her against me! No, Laura, he whispered hoarsely. She did it herself. David stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. No, she saved us from ourselves. The judge banged his gavel once. Case closed. The sound echoed like thunder in the still air. As everyone began to rise, I stayed seated at the back, half hidden behind a column. Laura's sobs filled the room. Michael stood motionless, and David simply stared at the empty space where the judge had been, as though trying to see the mother he finally understood. I felt tears slide down my cheeks, but not from sorrow. It was relief, peace, the kind that comes only when truth has done its work. As the crowd dispersed, a young reporter approached David. "Sir, how does it feel, losing your inheritance?" He paused, looked directly into the camera and said quietly, "We didn't lose it. We just learned who it really belonged to." Those words stayed with me, because he was right. Everything I'd ever owned, every brick, every dollar, had been built not for comfort, but for purpose. And purpose, once found, belongs to no one person. Later, as the courtroom emptied, I wheeled myself toward the window. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time that day. The beams struck the courthouse steps, gleaming against the rain-soaked stone. It looked like forgiveness, quiet, simple, unstoppable. I whispered softly, "You see, Thomas, justice doesn't always need a hammer. Sometimes it only needs a heart that won't bend." And for the first time in months, I felt him beside me again, not in memory, but in peace. The courtroom emptied slowly, like a storm drifting out to sea. What remained wasn't noise, it was silence, the kind that hums in your chest, thick with everything that can't be said aloud. Laura sat frozen in her chair, staring at the floor. Her hands, always polished and elegant, now trembled. Michael stood near the bench, his head bowed, clutching the pocket watch the judge had handed him. He turned it over and over in his hands like he was searching for time that had already run out. And David, my gentle David. He stood by the doorway, holding my ring against his heart as if afraid to breathe. No one looked at one another. No one spoke. It was as if the world had stopped spinning for a few precious, painful minutes. I remained in the shadows at the back of the room, my shawl pulled close, the same grey one I wore that first day. My wheelchair creaked slightly when I shifted, and for a moment I thought Laura had heard me, but she didn't. They were too lost in their own grief, and maybe in the mirror of themselves. The judge approached me quietly, his tone respectful. "Mrs. Marshall," he said softly, "I assume this was your intention all along?" I smiled faintly. "Not to punish them," I replied, "but to remind them what we stand for." He nodded, eyes kind. "You've done something most can't, turned pain into principle." "Pain," I said, "isn't meant to end us. It's meant to reveal us." He gave a small bow of understanding before walking away. When the room finally cleared, my children were the only ones left. I wheeled myself forward slowly, my heart pounding. They didn't notice me until the echo of my wheels filled the silence. Laura's eyes lifted first, red, swollen, confused. "Mom!" Michael turned next, his lips parted, but no sound came. David just whispered, "You're alive," as if afraid the truth might vanish if he said it too loud. I stopped. But before them, close enough to see the lines of exhaustion on their faces, faces I once kissed goodnight, now haunted by choices they couldn't undo. "Yes," I said softly, "I'm alive, though it seems it took my death for you to remember what that means." Laura's tears broke free. She covered her mouth with shaking hands. Michael sank into the nearest bench. David took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, unsure if he still had the right. "You planned this," Michael whispered. "You planned all of it. I prepared for what you became," I replied, "and I forgave you before you even knew what you'd done." Laura sobbed harder. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought you'd leave everything to Michael. I wanted my share of you." I looked at her gently. "My share of you," she said, as if love could be divided like land. "You always had more than a share," I said. "You had my pride. You just stopped seeing it." Michael clenched the pocket watch tightly. "I thought I was protecting you," he said quietly. "From her, from the mess. I didn't realize I was losing you in the process." "And you, David?" I asked softly. He looked at me, eyes full of remorse. "I thought staying quiet was the same as staying good." "No, my son," I said. "Silence is mercy only when truth is already known." He nodded, tears finally falling. For a long time, none of us spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of that pocket watch, the heartbeat of a father who who'd once kept this family whole. I reached out a trembling hand. "Come here," I said. Laura hesitated, but Michael placed a hand on her shoulder and guided her closer. David followed. When they stood before me, I said the words I had rehearsed 1,000 nights alone. "You fought over my will, but the only thing worth inheriting was the strength to love, even after being hurt." "Mom," Laura's voice cracked. "Can you ever forgive me?" "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't a gift I give. It's a bridge we cross together." And with that, I opened my arms. They hesitated for only a second. Then all three of them came forward. Laura fell to her knees beside me. Michael wrapped his arms around her shoulders, and David rested his forehead on my lap. The pocket watch ticked between us, marking the seconds of something fragile and holy: reconciliation. We stayed like that for a long while, a mother and her children, rebuilding without words. When they finally stood, their faces were softer, quieter, human again. "What will happen to the trust?" Michael asked. "It will do what it was meant to," I said. "Heal others. Maybe, in time, it will heal you too." David smiled faintly. "You always had a plan." "Not a plan," I said. "Just a prayer, that when truth finally came, you'd still have enough heart left to see it." As they left the courthouse, I watched from the window. The three of them walked side by side, not holding hands, not speaking, but closer than they had been in years. Outside, the sky had cleared. The air smelled of wet stone and lilac. The sunlight spilled across the steps like gold poured from heaven. And for the first time since Thomas died, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. "Peace that doesn't need proof," I whispered, but quietly. "They'll be all right now." And maybe in some faraway way, I heard him answer, "You did well, Helen." That evening back home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The steam curled upward, catching the light, just as it used to in our younger days. The world outside was calm again. No shouting, no lawyers, just the hum of life. I placed the pocket watch, the key, and the ring on the table before me. 3 objects, 3 stories, 3 lessons. "Time," I whispered, touching the watch. "Home," I touched the key. "Love," I touched the ring. That's the only inheritance that ever mattered. It has been 6 months since that day in court. The noise has faded now. The lawyers, the whispers, the headlines. What remains is silence, but not the cold kind that used to sit heavy in my chest. This one is gentle, like the hush of morning before birds begin to sing. Every dawn, I roll open the window curtains and watch the first light touch the roses in my garden. They survived the storm. Though some stems broke, new buds have begun to form around them. That's how love works too. It breaks, then blooms again, softer but wiser. The air smells of damp earth and lemon polish, the same scent Thomas used to love when I cleaned the wooden floor. Sometimes, if I close my eyes, I can almost hear him humming under his breath, that low tune he always sang when fixing something around the house. I still keep his chair by the porch. It faces east, toward the old oak tree. And every morning I set a cup of tea on its armrest, one for him, one for me. The house is quieter now, but not empty. David visits every Sunday with groceries and a new painting under his arm. He never says much, but his art speaks for him. Gentle cottages, blooming gardens, children playing in sunlight. He painted one of me last week, sitting in the garden with my roses. When I asked why, he said, "Because you remind me that love can grow even after it's been cut." It made me cry. Michael comes by once a month, always punctual, like the ticking of that pocket watch he now keeps in his coat. He helps me manage the bills for the trust. Yes, our trust, as he calls it now. He says it gives him peace to know that the money is helping others. He even volunteered to oversee a scholarship program for nursing students. "Seems fitting," he said one afternoon. "After all, it started with a nurse who built everything from kindness." He doesn't look at me when he says such things, but I can feel the apology woven inside every word. And Laura, she took the longest to come back. For months she sent letters, never long, just fragments of guilt. "I miss you. I was wrong. Can I see you?" When she finally came, she stood at the gate for nearly 10 minutes before walking in. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her hands were empty. No flowers, no gifts, just trembling sincerity. "I didn't know how to face you," she said. I took her hands in mine. "Face me the way you did when you were 5, with honesty, not fear." We sat under the same oak tree, where Thomas once built her a swing. She told me she'd sold her apartment and started volunteering at a children's hospice. It felt right, she said. I wanted to give something back, to earn what I took for granted. I smiled through my tears. Then you've already inherited more than money ever could have given. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the hospital downtown. The envelope bore the logo of the Marshall Community Trust. Inside was a photograph, a group of smiling nurses and children standing under a new sign that read, the Helen Marshall Wing, Pediatric Recovery Center. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I held the photo against my heart, eyes wet, whispering, we did it, Thomas. Your name lives where healing happens. That night I slept with the photo beside my bed. The moonlight fell across it, and in my dream, I saw Thomas standing in that new hospital wing, his hand resting on a child's shoulder, smiling that same quiet smile he always had when something good came from hardship. Spring rolled into summer. The garden grew wild with colour, roses, lilies, marigolds. Neighbours often stop by to compliment the blooms, and I tell them the secret. You talk to them kindly even when they're not blooming. Some laugh, thinking I'm being poetic. But it's true. Everything grows better when it's spoken to with love, even people. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit by the window and listen to the world outside. Children laughing down the street, dogs barking, the hum of life returning to ordinary rhythm. It feels good to be ordinary again. To be Helen Marshall, retired nurse, and not the woman whose children fought over a will. I think that's the quiet victory of forgiveness. It lets you become yourself again. Last Sunday, all three of them came together. Michael, Laura, and David. No lawyers, no papers, just family. They helped me set up a small tea table in the garden. Laura brought lemon cake. Michael trimmed the hedges. David played soft jazz from his phone. At one point, Laura looked around and said, "It's strange, Mum. The garden looks smaller now." I smiled. "That's because you finally grew up." They laughed, really laughed, the kind of laughter that fills the spaces where sorrow used to live. I realized then that this was what justice truly looked like. Not revenge, not pride, but peace restored. As the sun began to set, I poured one last cup of tea and placed it on Thomas's chair. The sky turned amber and gold, just as it had the day we moved into this house. I could almost hear his voice again. This will stand longer than we will. He was right. The house still stands, the roses still bloom. And our story, the one built on sacrifice, broken by greed, but mended by love, still breathes in every corner. Before going inside, I whispered the closing lines of a prayer I'd written years ago, one I never showed anyone. May what was lost return in better form. May forgiveness outlive the pain that caused it, and may those who inherit love learn how to plant it back. The wind rustled the garden gently, almost as if answering amen. That night, I sat by the window, the moonlight spilling over the table. The pocket watch ticked softly beside the photograph of the hospital wing. The key and the ring lay next to it, reminders that some doors are meant to stay open and some promises never close. And as I drifted to sleep, I thought, they finally understand, Thomas. The real inheritance isn't gold or land. It's peace that blooms even after the storm. If this story touched your heart, share it and remind the world that real inheritance is love. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of family, forgiveness, and justice served.